and etc.
Sure, and I apologize for having my back to you. I can't get up and present, but um, the project, going back to the original design and schematic design back in the fall and winter of fall of 2016 and winter over beginning of the new year, we did meet with staff from the respective boards internally to review the design and get some initial feedback. So we have done a little bit of groundwork, and obviously we intend to do a lot more. As you probably picked up on, there's a couple of key features here on the site. Obviously Route 85 coming through, and then driveways leading you up the hill to the new facility, parking ringing in the back, and parking along a public access drive here. Because of public safety needs and concerns with circulation, it was really important to have an emergency egress or access driveway, which is a two-way drive. So for fire and police response only, and then separating that from the public, which would be this driveway up to these spots. And of course, if it never gets connected to Woodward School, it would simply just be this amount of traffic. We consider the parking needs to be directly related to the staff and the vehicles that the department owns, including emergency management. And the visitor parking is essentially tied to the size of the training room, which is also used as a community meeting room. And the training aspect there would be limited to 50 people. And so there would be some parking devoted, more than that obviously, but that parking responds to that training need. When they do trainings, they would be able to put other departments that come and visit in the back. if they needed some additional parking. The other features are the drainage basins, which was discussed a little bit earlier. And more than likely, infiltration will be needed under parking surface infiltration, structured drainage, particularly on this side of the site because of the distance and the grades involved. Getting back to these drainage areas. Obviously, open drainage in some cases is preferred, in other cases the maintenance issues associated with it are somewhat less preferred, so there's pluses and minuses, but that's something that we want to work with Conservation Commission on and planning. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, there is an area of wetlands in here and actually down here, so we have a buffer zone, 100-foot buffer drawn on the plan. All of our drainage is outside of that. We have an existing culvert here. We are intending to use the existing curb cut and overpass, essentially culvert that goes there, and not touching it, but essentially a new road surface across, and then this additional driveway would be added more to the north of that. There will be a signal. In this case, the signal, as we discussed in our planning meeting this morning, or earlier today, is intended to be a emergency signal only. But one of the things we do want to talk to the board about is the issue of traffic in the area, and particularly the traffic loads for golf and potentially for Woodward School if we connected, as is shown in this site, where traffic could potentially come all the way out. You know, what would be the desired or need to do a traffic study because of that additional load, and or potentially change that signal to an actual light. But currently the plan from the design team and the public safety staff and the public safety committee is that this would just be an emergency signal there and would only stop the traffic when emergency vehicles are responding. And then finally, I should talk about the septic field, Board of Health issues. We did have a number of discussions with the health agent, trying to determine, you know, a good location, and they actually are in the field this week to do the perk tests and to determine the best location for that septic field. We have some anecdotal information about the area, but we'll get more specific information when we do that. This system, as you may already know, is fed from a pump station here at Woodward that takes the flow from Woodward, as well as, or in the new facility would take the flow from Woodward as well as the flow from the public safety facility back to that pump station. We would have to upgrade that, and then a force main would take it out to the septic field, and that would all obviously undergo engineering. As we kind of have alluded to in terms of scheduling, we consider this septic work potentially to happen prior to the building project, especially considering the schedule concerns from both golfing and the activities of Woodward. So we're still discussing that, of course, but that may happen at a different time than the actual building construction. So that's essentially a good overview, but I'm really interested to get your feedback, you know, concerns, questions, what things you would like our team to deal with. The civil engineer on the project is Howard Stein Hudson, and then Clara Batchelor is the landscape architect working on the project, and I know are eager to work with you. And just to touch on the schedule a little bit, we have been trying to work with your existing calendars. We anticipate at this point, based on the engineer's responses, that we'd probably submit an NOI at the end of October to get on to the November 16th hearing date, and probably the 23rd of October, submitting the planning board application to get on a hearing date. I don't see it here. 13th, yeah, there it is, planning board, November 13th. Yeah, so That would be the beginning of our process, and then we would hope to, based upon consultation with the boards, we would hope to be able to close it in 2 hearings, having the conservation close first, and then planning board having a final hearing. The goal is to close these hearings in your last scheduled hearing of the year in December, that as the second hearing. But obviously, that's a ways from now. We'll be in touch and wanting to get more feedback as that process goes forward. So I'll open it up to questions and comments.
Yeah, so even before we open up, the one other thing that we're planning to do at one of our future meetings, likely October 12th, is we are going to have basically a public input session. So it was specifically targeted towards abutters, or probably send a letter actually out to them, informing them, making them aware. But it would be open to anyone in the community that has an interest in the project, just to solicit the same sort of feedback that, questions that they may be asking of you, just to make sure that we've covered all of our bases and been as complete as possible in terms of submissions and thought about the impacts on the surrounding areas. So I guess with that, I'll turn to planning first. If any members have any comments, questions, or areas of consideration that they'd like to bring forward.
Hi, Don Morris on the planning board. We have Karina Quinn, town planner. Thanks for inviting us. It's great. This doesn't usually happen. Usually it's the other way around and everything gets delayed. But the number one thing that I heard that I think is going to be a potential disappointment is for anyone to decide or target a date when the site plan would close. And the time frame that you referenced is, we've done site plans in less time than that, but most have run considerably longer. You have to remember that the site plan is the plan that is used to build the project. So, and the planning board would not vote on a plan until the plans are complete and on the table. So we find that back and forth and revisions from the various disciplines within the engineering design eats up a lot of time. So again, well, why don't you just vote and we'll have we'll bring the plans next week and you can sign them. No, that's not the way we do it. So I think it's an aggressive schedule, but we have a very good town planner, and we're geared up for giving this, obviously very high priority. So I know you've already been dealing with Karina and those dates, making sure that your application is in on time, and then we can advertise the public hearing and start the public hearing.
Yeah,
But the real emphasis, though, is that the site plan, the drawings, calculations, the peer review by the consultant dealing with you and your consultants has to be complete before the board will vote to approve the site plan.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. And we've done a lot of these, obviously with our engineers. And that's exactly the way that we intend to do it, to give you a complete set of documents so they have the ability to respond appropriately. And obviously, once we undergo a first hearing, getting your comments and feedback and then revisions to the documents. So don't assume that my possibility of throwing out a second hearing date as the final hearing was a prediction necessarily, but I'm hopeful that we could get there in a cooperative way, and we try to do a thorough job of responding and making sure your concerns or questions are addressed, and if it takes more hearings, then it takes more hearings, but that's certainly our plan, and that's one of the reasons why we did ultimately, and our initial schedule actually had us submitting our planning board application earlier, But in consultation with the engineers, they felt they needed that extra time to make sure that you got a complete package and didn't get things in pieces and that isn't complete yet, or this changed, and, you know, that's one reason why we adjusted those dates.
Sure, yeah. You know that we coordinate with the other boards, like conservation mostly, so that sometimes if there's issues with conservation, they may ripple or impact into the site plan. And so until the conservation stuff gets resolved, can't figure out exactly what the site plan the end result might be. So
Yep.
sometimes there's some give and take with that also. And
Absolutely.
it's also not just the 5 members on the planning board, it's the public, it's a public hearing. So when we get into the public hearing, you know, the planning board may have a comfort level or questions and comments, but there may be a whole new set that we're unaware of
Sure.
until we open the meeting. And we have to deal with those, we can't just blow it off. Karina, did you have anything else that you wanted to go into?
I did. It's Karina Quinn, relatively new town planner. I had a couple of administrative questions we'll have to address prior to, or at the time of application. And one of the things is who'll be signing the applications in the town. And the town is exempt from the application fees, but we have an engineering consulting review fee that we have to determine what budget that comes from. As far as
Why
anything...
don't you give them a price range for that?
Oh, sure. For a major site plan approval and a special permit for lower impact development, the review fee is typically like $2,500. It's a little bit larger project, but we start with that, and if that gets submitted or in place at the time of the application, we expedite that much faster than if we do it after and ask for a quote. We kind of have a standard set rate for that, which gets supplemented if that starts to run out. But again, because it's a town project, we have to determine where that funding comes from.
I mean, there is funding for the construction, just so I will divert that question to Mr. Purple.
Yeah.
And my guess is he would likely be
Yeah.
the signer of the application or a member of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so that's pretty clear, because once I get the application in the office, I need a couple days to just make sure it's all complete and let you know if there's anything that has to be supplemented. But we try to get that right to the engineering consultant to review right away. So we like to set up maybe an electronic way to do that. And you submit hard copies as well.
Yep.
But if we can get electronic documents already over, they can start setting up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's typically how we've done it. Submit the hard copy at the same time, having the electronic copies go over.
Yeah.
That's very typical.
Yep, and it's also real important to have, when you make a submission, just have a cover letter that explains what you're submitting, so we don't have to go searching for it.
Yep.
The more organized, the faster we can respond and get it out to the individual departments that also have to return comment. So that'd be very helpful.
Sure.
Okay, anything else? No, you already touched upon a traffic study. I'm not sure,
Yeah, it's
where
something
that's
I
going.
feel like we have to have some discussion on, because the project base package of the project may not consider the connection to Woodward, but it will have the golf impact as part of it. So to kind of figure out but the golf is actually already in existing use there, so that you wouldn't think the traffic count would increase. So and the public safety has a very low load, because there's really no visitor traffic, much of that during the day. So kind of have to puzzle it through, but I think it's something we should probably discuss before we, the pros and cons, before we decide one way or the other.
Okay, and also just want to mention that you can call my office anytime if there's any question that comes up, so that we can try and get an answer for you right away, so that we can keep the pace going to, maybe try and hit your targets, although, it's pretty aggressive. But that's good. It's good to start that way, so.
Yeah.
Anything else? You'll need certified abutters lists,
Yes.
those kinds of things. PDFs of everything should be submitted, so we can easily transmit them to the other departments. And then there's the legal ads that have to be placed in the newspaper. And then also note, well, we'll probably be sending, someone in the town will be sending out abutter notifications. We require the green card
Green
return
cards,
receipt,
Returns.
not just the certified mailing
Yep.
receipts.
No problem.
See anything else? And if you have any questions on scheduling as you get closer to application, just feel free to call, and we'll update you.
Thanks.
Let's go back to that traffic study. That's one of those things that if it's decided halfway through the public hearing process, it holds it up.
That's why I want to have a conversation.
So
on that
maybe-
As soon as possible.
Maybe you could get on our agenda next week. And then the planning board and whoever you bring can discuss it. You have the benefit of all the planning board members. And then if it's felt that it's not needed, then
Waive
we'll
it
go
right
that
there.
way. But if we need it, then we'd have a bit of a jump on it.
Okay.
Or at least be able to define to what extent the traffic would be studied. Would it be just localized, or would we study the whole town?
Yeah, right. No, I obviously have to check with our engineer to make sure he's available for that hearing date, but I definitely want to solve that question as soon as possible.
Sure. Before I walk away, there's 3 other planning board members here. Any comments or questions from other board members? Mimi?
Mimi Latrell. So during construction, the driveway is going to be the access to the golf course?
So this is, the first half hour of our meeting tonight was joint with the Golf Course Committee. I'll summarize and Lou can
Well, I
certainly
was
chime
here
in.
for, I was here for
Yeah,
most
so
of it.
it depends on what they decide to do with the golf course. The goal is to try to keep the golf course open during construction. We have not proven that that will happen yet, but that is the goal and objective that we are striving towards. But their committee's about a month old. Our committee's about 3 months old. So we are obviously a little bit ahead of where they're at. So I think that's a to be determined, to be quite honest, depending on what they do with the golf course. But yes, that would be the only way to access. They'd have to get that driveway in ahead of time if they were going to keep it open during construction.
Okay. Just a couple other things that I'd mentioned. Landscape plan, native planting, and lid techniques utilized.
Sure.
That's it.
I think a couple of our committee members had questions, but just one question on the traffic study. So as Jeff mentioned, right, our plan stops kind of at the red line. We've been pushing the school committee to try to make some determinations around what they want to do with the driveway, because I imagine that greatly impacts your view on the traffic of whether you have school buses going through there or you just have police, fire, and their visitors going through there. If we do set up a meeting, I am going to alert the school committee that they may want to expedite some of their decision-making process so that whenever our final plans are brought forward, that there is a plan that someone could articulate to you of whether that driveway is stopping or continuing, because I'd have to imagine that impacts some of your decisions and timing, et cetera.
There's an example of that at Trotter, where all the roads are connected, but some of them are off limits to buses. So you could build it and put up a gate, or you could build it and manage the way they do at Trotter, which is, they tell all the bus companies and the bus drivers that this is the route you have to take. You can't go out onto Deerfoot.
Yeah, I mean, our problem actually may be the opposite, is we're trying to help the school because they can't turn the school buses around properly currently. So by creating a flow-through was helping them, but again, that would create a lot more traffic at that signal than, or
Right, and then
potential
that would-
signal,
That would ripple into the traffic study out on 85.
exactly.
The curve, where when you come around the curve, if there's cars stacked up, you can't see them until you get around the
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
And we do have it until October, we have another meeting October 16th, just in case next Monday is too quick for a turnaround.
Yeah, if next Monday's not good to have that early traffic discussion, we meet again on October 16th, and the planning board has a long history of adjusting or adding meetings
Mhm.
to accommodate.
Yeah, I mean, I know our engineer is on vacation on the 20th, so the 16th might work with him. And your comment, Jason, is important because it may be too soon to have this meeting next week. We may not be able to, other than talking about it, we may not be able to make any decisions because we don't yet know what's going to happen with the biggest contributor to the traffic in that location. So,
all right, so
Does the board have a feeling for what a traffic study, realize if we studied the whole town, it'd be many thousands of dollars, but do you, or does the board have an idea of what that would cost?
we haven't gotten,
You know, if it's $500, which it's not,
yeah, it's,
then we just say, let's just do it.
yeah. It's not, it would be an amount that we could, I think, handle as a project, and it would take some time to do it, but, so, even if we decided in mid-October that we should do one, I don't think it's a problem. We could certainly do it. Whether or not it's possible to have it, done and ready to go when we're planning to submit our NOI is another question. You know, that may need to push back, which is, I'm sure, what you're getting at. But, you know, once we pull the trigger to do it, it won't take a lot of time. We just now need to plug it into the rest of the schedule and may push it a hearing date. So,
before you leave, I think Mr. Goodney and Mr. Rooney had questions for planning.
Excuse me for my ignorance, but I don't know how really the planning board works entirely, but would this be viewed as two separate projects? The building of basically the red line and as one, and then the golf course alterations as another? Or is this one project viewed by your group? In other words, when you say complete project, complete plan, does that include moving the, the storage for the golf carts and the creation of the access road and parking lot?
We could cut it into two projects. It would be how you would want to do it. Single project, or those type of things, you know, where the tee box is. If you have the tee box, whether it's over here or a little bit over there, doesn't really impact them. That may never show up in the site plan.
Okay.
I think the main focus is what your focus is, which is those driveways, that facility, the safe egress and proper drainage, that type of thing, utilities. I think that there could definitely be a lot of flexibility relative to,
I mean, I just don't
Not
want to be in
holding
the
up the
ninth hour
project for
not
the golf
having-
course.
If that isn't buttoned up,
no, I don't,
that's gonna hold,
I don't think we'd let that happen.
okay.
Mr. Rooney,
So I fear that at times I sound like a broken
just
record.
use your mic.
One of the concerns I have, Mr. Morris, relate to the timing of construction and the accommodation of the revisions to the golf course trying to take place at or around the same time as the construction. Seems it would be more efficient, save money, et cetera. So when you were talking about parking, and you were identifying parking based upon, for instance, size of the conference room, et cetera, I don't think you were taking into account parking for the golf course. But I think we're gonna need to, because when you do your traffic study, part of the traffic relating to this site is going to be from the golf course. So I don't see how it can be done as two separate plans. I think it needs to be done as one plan, because the just for instance, the traffic study, you can't do a full traffic study if you're not going to incorporate or discuss the traffic coming out as a result of the usage of the golf course. So I think it may be premature to have that discussion since we don't even know very much about the machinations of the golf course. That's point number one. Point number two, and Jason just stated this, and I know this committee is somewhat under this, under this charge. Jason said is a goal to keep the golf course open during construction. I go further. I think it's an obligation, it's a requirement to keep the golf course open during discussion, and it's not just a goal, because we have been told that if the golf course has to shut down, they're going to lose memberships. And if they lose memberships, that's the majority of their revenue. So when you're looking at this, and I'm speaking to the architect primarily, when we present matters to the planning board, assuming this board is in agreement, what you present has got to be all-encompassing. It's got to be not just parking for this facility, but it's got to take into account the interests associated with the golf course. Because at town meeting, and I was one of the movers, if you will, of this article, the reality is it passed because of the agreement and of the understanding that the golf course would continue as a golf course and that there'd be a conservation restriction. So I know that this committee's charge is just to build the public safety facility, but I put an asterisk on that. It's to build the public safety facility along with keeping the golf course operational. And that's the type of information, especially when Mr. Morris mentioned that the site plan drawings need to be complete before his board will approve the site plan. That makes sense. But I think that site plan, in order for it to be complete, it's got to take into account site plan issues associated with the golf course. So I don't know how it can be done as two projects.
Anyone else?
Can I ask golf course people a question?
Let's, unless it is directly relating to planning?
Well, I might, no.
All right, quick on that one point.
I was holding the question before to the golf course people. The way the parking lot's portrayed here in the drawing with the access road, the parking lot, and where the shed for the golf carts would be, is that something that, is there any glowing problems with that, or is that something that may work?
Just go to a mic.
Well, I guess we're on TV now, so,
Should come
Right
over
up
to that
here.
mic, yeah.
up there.
Andre Fortin, perhaps I should have asked this when we first met, but let me understand the red line correctly. Because that red line where the drainage basin is indicated, that juts out fairly into the current golf course land. And if you look to the right of it, you see that temporary 9th green. And if you just look to the left of it, there's that first tee. Now, presumably, if the clubhouse is located somewhere in the middle or somewhere thereabouts, there's going to be traffic from the 9th green to the first tee and so on. And my question is that red line, does that indicate a no-go zone for the people on the golf course or not?
Is that a building right there?
That's the building location based on the plan that was submitted at just prior to town vote. In other words, prior to town vote, which delineated the amount of acreage that the building was going to occupy and the conservation land was going to occupy on which the golf course was going to be built. That parking area on the right was located close to the clubhouse and where that temporary tee was there as well as the first tee. What was not there was the discussion about the septic is new, but the red line that's encircling the public facility area, the way I can see it. And I'm not clear, and I may be mistaken, and I'm not clear as to whether or not golf course patrons are going to be able to walk across the drainage basin, and is that going to be part of the golf course land, or is that meant to indicate, red meaning public facility only and golf course out, golf course
The way-
patrons out.
The way I interpreted the request to put this red line on was to delineate whose is what, particularly during the construction, funding of the construction and the actual construction activities. Once it's complete and it's open to the public, both, all that land in there, there wouldn't be any barrier. That red line doesn't represent a barrier that you can't walk across. There's no fences there, there's no plantings there, so, it depends on what how the town wants to use it, but I certainly could see you being able to walk, around the north side of the drainage basin to the first tee directly,
Mhm.
cutting across those red lines. But it really, that's my opinion, it really is depending on how the town wants to operate the facilities.
So it's,
Yeah, we asked for this just to show where we have approved funding and where we were gonna be digging and moving items and what we figured was included in our scope. That doesn't mean it's a fence or anything like Jeff said. There will be fencing for security of some of the operations, but that's much closer over to the actual building itself.
mhm. Because if the golf course is going to remain in operation, then obviously, we're going to have to resolve the issue of the clubhouse, and as I mentioned previously, the storage of the golf carts, the
Yeah, I think
processing
we're
of
repeat-
customers and so
I-
on.
I'm sorry, Andre, we have a full agenda.
Okay.
We've already covered that. So, does that answer your question or
Well,
comment
ju-
that you were trying to?
Just to clarify, and I'll take a second, does it work if people park here and pick up their cart and walk to the tee? Does that work?
Well,
I'm not a golfer, but
it does work, yes, as long as they can park within normal walking distance of the clubhouse where they would be processed, that would work.
okay.
Now, may I ask another question?
I'm gonna have to move on, because we have Conservation and Board of Health,
Okay.
and we already had the Golf Course Committee, so that was just to answer your question.
Yep.
No,
Just want to make sure.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Shea?
Hi, Brian Shea. One quick point on, back to the planning and the traffic studies. To coordinate with Karen, I know a number of studies were done as part of the Main Street Improvement Project. There were a lot of data taken on traffic on 85, so a lot of the data may exist already. We can utilize that. It may need to take additional counts, but check with her first.
Thank you. Conservation.
Evening. Mark Pasamato, Conservation Commission. We've got a number of other members here tonight as well. So I guess just to reiterate a little bit of what Mr. Morris said, it's, critically important for your submittal when it comes time that it, really be complete. Because we can eat through a lot of meetings, when things are just not complete, it ends up being a churn, We have a wetlands consultant on our board, and we also have a stormwater management consultant on our board, and you're gonna be applying for both permits under the Wetlands Protection Act, the town bylaw, and the stormwater management bylaw. So, that's gonna, entail this work that's gonna be done down here with the septic system, that I understand you're doing some perk test holes now this week on. It's gonna entail these drainage infrastructures, pieces here, proximity over here. You've got a lot of impervious area here that previously was, grass and trees and things, and that's all got to be dealt with. We probably would like to see, whatever you can do for, stormwater best management practices and not just, dig a hole in the ground to hold water, those kinds of things. So there's also this the stream here that I believe is being called intermittent, so the burden of proof is going to be on, you, the applicant, to prove that that is intermittent as you go through your filing and application and so forth. So this parking area up here that you've been talking about for the golf course, is that a temporary parking area or a permanent parking area?
I'm
So-
looking at Jason because,
That's a theoretical.
A theoretical parking
Like,
area?
it's
so
on the other side of our red line.
So our project, in terms of budgeting, ends at that red line. The plan that was presented at town meeting was to build a public safety facility with the ability to continue golf course operations. I think everyone shares the passion that Mr. Rooney and the others, the golf course committee, is we not only want to keep that golf course open, but we also want it to be financially viable. So should we find a way to deal with some of the other issues that have been addressed tonight with the golf course committee, my thought would be that would be a permanent parking area. The question is one application versus two applications, I think, at this point.
So again, the term NOI was thrown out there a couple times, which means notice of intent. And it'll come into play whether you're going to file one for the entire project, including or not including that parking area, one for the septic, because I heard something about the timing of that might want to be built sooner than later because it has to tie back into the school and some infrastructure upgrades. So I don't know if you're planning on one NOI, two, or even prior to an NOI, if you're going to go through a ANRAD process to delineate this wetland area here, as well as the wetland area down here between the 8th fairway, where the 9th tee is, and the second tee box.
The wetlands have been delineated. There was a wetland scientist out there that flagged it.
Done last fall, prior to us actually starting the
the town
schematic
did it.
design.
Right, so that comes down, we need to have an agreement between the commission and your wetland scientist as the placement of all of those flags and come to a consensus on that.
Correct.
Right, so that's a step in the process here as well. That can be done as part of the NOI, but, it means we gotta get out there, we gotta, look at it, agree that all the flags in the right places. If not, get back out there, test some soils, look at vegetation, adjust things as required, which may have impacts to some of your setbacks and things.
Yeah, sure.
So, I only bring that up because of the timeline which you had of filing and hoping to close within 2 meetings and that sort of thing, similar to what Mr. Morris and the planning board brought up. We're not there to hold projects up, we're there to move them forward and get them permitted, but, those little details can become snags and slow things down a little bit. Michelle, you want to add anything?
You covered the majority of what I was going to ask. Michelle Simoneau from the Conservation Commission. I guess I just had a couple of comments. Speaking to the comprehensive permit, approach. A lot of the environmental permits are threshold driven, so it's based on, acreage of land disturbance, amount of soil disturbance, that sort of thing. So I'm kind of hoping that you guys are thinking about that, because even though we don't have jurisdiction over, like NIPI's programs through the federal government, that's something you're gonna be having to look at through your permitting process and plan ahead, primarily through the NIPI's program. To that end, there's no scale or arrow or anything, north arrow on here to orient you, but what's the total acreage of disturbance at this point?
We talked about a number many, many months ago when they were doing the town meeting as to the total, and I don't have it off the top of my head. It's probably the number that we calculated at the time was probably actually greater than what's shown inside the red zone right now. They're actually doing the
Roughly
survey,
is fine.
doing the survey right now. I don't know off the top of my head.
No, order of an acre, 5 acres?
Definitely more than an acre.
More than an acre, okay. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Okay, so you're aware of those
Yeah,
regulations?
I think it's like the 5 to 6 range, somewhere in there.
And so, for that, you can't segment a project, so you'll want to think of
Yeah.
your total disturbance, even looking into the future.
Right. My reaction is to things that have been said in the various different contexts, conservation planning, this board, golf committee, is that there's still a decision and discernment process that needs to take place on the town's client side to figure out the right direction to give the professionals, to give you the right plan. So, as it is, we've gotten a certain amount of scope under our wings here for the project, and I think we just need to discern what's the right way to go about the stuff that we know is out there that still has to get done, but that, because it's connected to other parties and other events, still need to be discussed and fully formed. So I guess I'm not really yet certain what will be coming to you on those dates with, because we don't actually know as a group. But whatever it is, it's gonna be well thought out and complete, so that the goal is to not have those situations where you get halfway through and you realize that, oh, we didn't take that into account, and that's gonna push us out, and now we've gotta re-engineer this whole piece. Because clearly that would deep six the whole process. We go back to the beginning again. So that's not in our best interest and not in the town's best interest.
Right, and I don't mean it to be a lecture or anything like that, I just, you're a consultant. We're trying to get ideas on the table, and I guess we just want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with the
Yeah.
approach. Just wanted to ask about, I know Mimi had mentioned low-impact designs, and we would be particularly interested in that when it comes to stormwater management. This is a pretty significant addition of impervious surface to, area that probably drains pretty well right now. And so I think we'd want to see some creative approaches to stormwater management, whether it be, rain gardens or just low areas that can be good for native plantings or whatever it is, just some creative, but, low cost type of approaches to that.
Absolutely.
That would be good to see. I think that's it. I think, Mark, you covered everything else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or anything?
Any questions for conservation?
No?
Thank
Okay.
you. Board of Health.
Good evening. Mary Lou Woodford, Chair, Board of Health, and Paul Pazinski, Health Officer for the Health Department. I want to thank you for inviting us a lot. Like has said before, a lot of times we come in after projects getting going, so really appreciate allowing us to have input. I think before you got here, Paul, there was discussion with Golf about having the 2 septics, and I wasn't sure, have you been in communication with Paul as far as the timeline of applying for those?
Not to that level of detail. Paul was involved, as I mentioned early on, when we had some staff reviews with our engineer about the thoughts and positions of the septic field. And at that time, I think we actually even discussed the fact that the golf clubhouse was there and whether that was gonna actually get tied into the septic field. We talked about the soil conditions that are out there, and the fact that it's a pressurized system from the school, and how we would have to kind of reconfigure things. Now that we've picked up the engineering into the design development phase, and actually this week, you're gonna go out, I think, and go look at some test pits that are being dug for, to do the perk tests and infiltration tests. So we'll start to get a better handle on where this field can go and how big it's going to be and what that means for the system that we're looking at, ultimately. So that's kind of where we are right now, and until we get more of that data, we don't really know which way we're gonna be going yet.
Yeah, we actually have scheduled with John Noonan, through talking with McPhail Associates. Thursday, we're going out. Now, that assumes that everything can be done in one day. They've got to dig a minimum of 4 deep holes, assuming that, deep observation holes they're called, assuming that they can fit everything for both the primary area for the new septic system leaching area and the reserve or future. Then they've got to do 4 perk tests.
Yep.
But that's, if everything is running on schedule as far as our previous field work goes for the superficial geology that we're familiar with on that site. I don't, the gentleman has a pointer. Can I borrow your pointer? I just want to, just a couple things, just to let the committee members know. Work this thing here.
Button on the side.
What's on the side?
Yeah.
Oh, here it is, okay. The present septic tank and pump chamber for Woodward School is over here. There's also a valve chamber, which doesn't, technically it doesn't mean, anyway, that pump chamber, of course, is, in the septic tank is calculated, the size of those tanks are calculated based on the flow from the school, which is approximately 4,995 gallons a day of estimated sewage flow. It's about 5,000 gallons a day. The building here is estimated to be probably about 3,000 gallons a day. So the engineers can do one of several things. They could have what we call a flow equalization tank they could put up here. They could pump up to that flow equalization tank and then pump to the field itself. The field will have to be pressure dosed. I mean, because under the Title V code, the state code, anything over 2,000 gallons of estimated sewage flow has to be pressure distributed. That's not pressure sent, but pressure distributed through the field. It's a little complicated, but anyway, believe it. We have capacity on our present staff. We don't have to farm anything out to any other engineers, any civil engineers. There's a combined, I think, almost 78 years of professional experience on our staff, not to brag, but, you know, between myself and the other person. We're all part-time, by the way. So we think we're capable of analyzing properly civil engineered plans as long as they meet the code. So where the tank is going to go for this building, we don't know, but that's up to the engineer. We'll have to determine that. The other thing is, the soil testing that was done for the Woodward School was in this area, and it was all glacial outwash soil, which again, to the average person doesn't mean anything. Engineers, it's a beautiful soil to have because your field doesn't have to be that large. Under what we call long-term acceptance rates under the code, the size of the field is much smaller because the perk rates are so fast. The rest of the site is what we call glacial till, with areas of shallow to bedrock and bedrock outcropping, especially as you get down to this area here and closer to Lattisquama. So this area is probably as logical as any area for us to look at. I'm not sure why they put the 200-foot setback distance from here to the proposed leaching area, because the setback for tributaries, and there's a tributary that runs through this wetland, connects to this tributary, which may be, if it is what we call continuous flow, and this continuous flow for Board of Health, Title V purposes, is different than continuous flow for Conservation Commission, Wetlands Protection Act, Chapter 131, Section 40, or the Wetlands Bylaw. Two different types of definitions, so we won't go into the technicalities of that today, but you only need 100-foot distance from wetlands. But if it is a tributary, and I don't know what that line designates, there's two parallel lines there?
It's a 20-foot buffer zone.
20-foot buffer, okay. You only have to be 100 feet away from the wetlands protection, the bordering vegetated wetland line, or hydric soil line, whichever you use to define what the Conservation Commission is going to insist on you using as their definition for defining the wetland. So it's only 100 feet.
Yep.
Keep that in mind. And because this area may
have to go down.
yeah, exactly, may have to be relocated. And again, one day, a lot of times when we go out for doing soil testing, it can take 3 days, 4 days, 5 days.
Yep.
You don't know what you're going to hit. The one thing I got to say is, normally what would happen in a professional office building or for a large septic flow, the first thing the client, the private company would do, the corporation or a company would do, would be to hire an engineer to go out and look at where the best location for the septic system is, because that determines everything. We don't have public sewers, as you know, in town. So that is the determining factor for a lot of sites in town, office buildings along Route 9, and even institutional uses and so forth. But this was done sort of backwards. In other words, you pick the architect picked this site as the most ideal. Well, that's also the most ideal soils. We were sorry to see it, but nonetheless, they have their reasons for locating it there. Hopefully, we'll find some decent soils. But normally, you would pick the area for your septic system leaching area first, because the cost can vary tremendously depending on the type of soil that we encounter. If it's gonna be very slow perks, then it's gonna be a large area. They'll have to import soil, or sand, we call it, or whatever. They'll have to figure that all out. But that result in additional cost that may not have been factored in, I don't know. The good thing about the Board of Health is that there is no fee, because it's a municipal schedule for soil testing. There's no fee. Normally, we'd charge a fee for soil testing, but there is none. We don't have any fee for the application review, for the plan review. So everything is free of charge. Is that a- What's that?
Timeline for the review.
Yeah, we need to have some sort of review, and we'd like to have, usually, the code allows us 45 days, but normally we take 2 weeks to 3 weeks for our review. Unless we encounter issues or problems or corrections that are needed, goes back to the engineer, and there could be additional weeks. But we also have, the Board of Health has to ultimately approve the plan. That's the 3-member elected board. And they schedule meetings variably depending on their availability, because they're all working. We don't have a set schedule for Board of Health meetings. But that can be, I'm sure, worked out. So,
Yeah.
unless
Thank
there's
you.
any questions of us.
Just one comment in fairness to the architect. The prior Public Safety Study Committee directed him to park that building right there for 2 main reasons. Everything we've heard about golf, and out of the utmost respect to the folks that live on Ladiscombe Road. We didn't really have an option to put the building up where the septic field is.
Okay.
Mr. Rooney?
Yes.
There's a clubhouse there now that utilizes a septic system. That clubhouse is going to have to be moved.
Right.
And that clubhouse is going to need a septic system. Is it your opinion, and if you don't know yet, that's fine, or the town's opinion, that the golf course, the clubhouse, could not share a septic system that's going to be designed for this facility? And the reason I ask is I make the assumption that sharing a system is cheaper than building 2 systems.
Correct. It is. If it can be done, the engineers can be both very technically proficient and very creative. And it's just a matter of engineering, John. Yes, the clubhouse leaching area can be combined with the public safety building and the school. It's all what we refer to as domestic sewage. Domestic sewage is all one type of sewage. It really depends on how the engineer configures the tanks and where the leaching area is going to go. But it can be all put in one leaching area, the school, the clubhouse, and the public safety building.
So that would be the preliminary first step, is for the engineer to identify, and Jeff, I don't know if you told me that they've already done this, the engineer to identify whether or not a shared septic system could be utilized at this location. And Paul, early, I take it, Jeff, tell me if I'm wrong, that it was your understanding that the engineer indicated that it could not be shared.
Yeah, maybe I should clarify. The engineer said that the most cost-effective way to do it is to not share, is to have something separate for the clubhouse itself.
Okay, so,
Currently, the leaching area and the septic tank for the clubhouse is separate, has its own. It could, and that could work too, possibly.
okay, so my question is, when the public safety building is coming before the Board of Health for the permit relative to the septic system, you do all these previous bores, et cetera. Shouldn't the golf course committee, to the extent, or should the golf course, to the extent that it's gonna have a separate septic system, also be presented to you at the same time?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. The only thing they're gonna have to determine is also, again, what are they looking for? The present clubhouse was designed for X number of seats, and it was approximately 300 gallons of estimated sewage flow per day, so it's not a lot. I think it was about 300. And it depends on what the golf course people feel they want to do. If they're going to start talking about a restaurant, clubhouse, banquet facility like a, then you're talking about a large amount of flow. I mean, you're
I think
talking,
they're looking to try to pick it up where it is and put it down somewhere in close proximity to where it is, not expanding its size. But at least they need to have that, that building in order to operate the golf course the way that they're operating. But my question is that we are trying to keep to a tight schedule in terms of the permitting, et cetera. And if it's going to require a separate septic system, we need to know that for a fact sooner rather than later. And once, if that's the case, we need to get those borings, et cetera, done for this second septic system to be done soon, because you're doing the ones for the public safety building this week, correct?
the soil testing,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah, and they did not convey to me that this soil testing was going to be for also the clubhouse.
And
But
I
it
don't think
could-
they are. I'm not,
Okay.
and the reason I asked is where I started is that if it has to be a separate system, then it would not be located where this drawing has it, correct?
Correct,
So you'd have to do boring somewhere else.
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So do you have an estimated timeline on when we'd be able to answer Mr. Rooney's concern, just so that he can go back to the golf
Well,
course committee and come up
obviously, I'm
with
gonna
a
have to-
contingency plan?
Ask the engineer to reevaluate it again. I'll ask him to do two things. One, to determine, if he can, what the cost would be to do either connection to the field that we're currently designing versus a separate field. And secondly, if they had a separate field, where the heck would you put it? And I know we've already had preliminary discussions about that, because obviously we're not designing in a vacuum.
Right.
These things are happening. And so I don't know exactly when he can get back to me, but, you know, it's possible in our working group meeting next week, I could have an answer, but don't hold me to it.
Okay.
One other thing I'd just like to mention while the engineering company is, I didn't get your name.
My name is Jeff Shaw, no
Jeff.
context, but the engineering, civil engineer is Howard Stein Hudson. It's, that's the engineering firm.
Oh, that's not, who is John Rooney? I mean, John Rooney. John Rooney. Who is John Noonan?
I believe that is the company doing the excavation, the.
Excavation, you mean the moving of
The
all the
dirt.
earth?
Yeah, they're doing the test bits.
Well,
For the perk test only, right?
Yeah.
We haven't, yeah.
Yeah, McPhail's doing the geotech work. In total, they have a driller, who's one company. They also have an excavator, who is Noonan, I believe, doing the actual excavating for the
Well,
infiltration.
okay, but Noonan has somebody on his staff, it could be John Noonan himself, who is the soil evaluator. We asked to have them
Correct,
send
yeah.
us an application with the soil evaluator, with a certified number and so forth and so on.
That's right.
Just one other thing for the committee and to let people know. A lot of people talk about perk test, and it's a very highly variable issue. To give you an idea, if it was all sand and gravel, or what we call outwash soil, which is where the present leaching area is, which is right there, that square, then it goes fairly quickly. You can figure that 4 holes, as long as they're dug with the proper equipment, excavator as opposed to a backhoe, but we don't necessarily dictate what kind of equipment. And they're hand dug, the holes are dug and the water is put in, it goes very quickly, and the tests are done very quickly. When you have what we refer to as ablation till or glacial till, the perks can be very slow. Some of them upwards of almost 60 minutes an inch. It's got to go 9 inches, so you can figure 6 times 6 inches times 60 minutes you're talking several hours. We have part-time staff. We have to witness all the tests from beginning to end. That's what the code requires. So it's a matter of scheduling. To try to do this, if the soils are very slow, it could take many days. So I want to just make that clear,
Sure,
that,
understood.
you know, it's not just one day.
Yep, yeah, that's.
Any further questions?
Russ Gregory, Southborough Conservation, but this is more to Mr. Pazinski. If the soils are so great down at the lower area, I see septic systems under pavement all the time. Why aren't we looking at reconfiguring the system, putting it under the pavement? Or are we just going by what somebody's proposed and throwing it out in the middle of the golf course and you know, tearing up more area, but additionally, maybe going to less desirable soils? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, well, that could be done. Again, it's up to the engineer to decide. But you're right. The best soils are in that area, and part of them could be under pavement, and he's correct. Ross is correct that there are a lot of septic systems, especially a lot of the office buildings up and down Route 9 that are all under pavement. You have to, of course, take that into account. The types of pipes
Right.
have to be
When we had
loading for, you know, H20 loading and so forth.
When we had our initial sort of investigative meeting with the staff, and I think you were there, we had a long discussion about where we would put it relative to those conditions that you pointed out, and we did discuss would we have it under the pavement or not, and the costs of doing so, and essentially, if anything happens to it, you've not got to dig up the public safety lot to get to it, weighed into the decision to at least initially explore this area here with the hope that that would actually become the real location for it. But if we run into what you're talking about, you know, we may be looking for.
You may have to fall back to.
We may go back there.
Yeah.
Because that's the most logical next step.
Yep. Good point.
Thank you. I just didn't like the thought of not exploring that,
Yeah, it was-
especially after
it was-
hearing how great those soils are.
Yeah, it was certainly the first thing that we were told is that's the best place for it.
Right.
So we investigated what would it take to put it there, but I think initially we felt like if the soils tested out well, it would be best just to put it not under a parking lot.
I would agree with that also.
Jeff,
Just-
let's just say that
Yep.
that didn't work. Any concerns with the weight of the fire apparatus, given that this is the fire side of the building?
No, it can be done, it can be engineered, it's just
Everything, right, can be engineered.
there's more money
More
in it.
asphalt, right, though?
And we're also then into a position of drainage and infiltration because we have to have separation. So now you're changing a whole host of other things related to where it goes on the site.
Anything further? All right, thank you to all the boards and committees and commissions that joined us tonight. So the next item is a design development update. Basically,
We'll do it quick.
do you need a water break or anything? You're good?
No, I'm good. We can keep moving.
All right.
So in front of you, I think you have packages 11 by 17 that include floor plans, some perspectives, options for the exterior of the building, and then towards the end, an alternative floor plan. But I want to move quickly through this, and because I will say that the working group met prior to this meeting, discussed all of these drawings, and in some cases in detail, and do not yet have a recommendation as to what of any of these the committee should vote on. However, there was preferences, and out of those preferences, we're going to be moving in certain directions. So I'm just going to highlight that stuff so that you can understand and ask questions, and we can talk about that. Probably the first place to start, though, Jason reminded me at the last meeting, Of this group, we discussed the apparatus bay, and the question was put whether or not we should include the full footprint of the apparatus as part of the base bid, or, as was proposed at town meeting, continue to show it with essentially a bite taken out of it so that it's slightly smaller. And the discussion at the last meeting, I think, between us and the OPMs for the project, Vertex, thank you. Our advice was that it probably wouldn't impact the bid much, and it's not really even worth putting in as an alternate once we do get to the bid. So our recommendation at the time was to just build it out to the full footprint. Jason reminded me that that was actually never voted on by your commission board, and since it was essentially a town meeting item as part of the package at town meeting, it really probably would be something that you should formally engage on. So maybe that's the first place to start.
Yeah, so just some history for those that were not on the Public Safety Study Committee. When we originally received certain cost estimates and the cost had skyrocketed, mainly due to inflation, but also due to kind of some inefficiencies in the building that were subsequently cut down, one of the areas that the fire chief agreed to at least consider was to shave off a back portion of 2 out of the 5 bays, so it would cut down on the square footage. And if you think about the way that we were doing our costing previously, it was literally square feet times a certain dollar amount that came to a better looking number. One of the things the Public Safety Study Committee discussed at length at that point in time was, does shaving off that back end of the bay really actually save you the money that it was saving just doing simple math of square feet times the dollar amount per square foot? So the question really in front of us is, do we square off these apparatus bays, which essentially you're actually making the building more square, as opposed to having kind of I'll call it an awkward corner, and go out to bid with this presentation? Or do we go back to the original, I'll call it jog in, which if you want to see how the jog in looked, it's still on the site plan on the first page.
I just flipped back.
You kind of see how that back end of the southern part of the building is missing. I think you now, Jeff, have had the benefit of Vertex's expertise, and Vertex certainly chime in if I'm mischaracterizing something, but I think the thought is that there really is not an incremental cost of squaring this off. Is that a fair characterization? You probably have to come to a mic.
So if I recall the discussion at the meeting, it was more supporting Jeff's description of the cost that would be equal, and the suggestion from us that if that's the case, then we should put it in the base bid, but certainly do support Jeff's thought that the cost would be equal.
And I just think, even putting the cost aside for a second, by taking out that back portion, you're basically limiting any, whether it be the current fire chief or fire chief 5, 10, 30 years down the road, you've now basically taken away potential storage for up to 2 additional apparatus, depending on what happens in the town or what they need to store indoors. We're talking about garage space. We're not talking about jail cells that require all sorts of surveillance and extra equipment. So I'll open it up to discussion, but my intent is to give Jeff formal direction that he should proceed this way unless there's some objection from committee members.
Can you clarify, for those who weren't on the safety or study committee, I still don't understand, what did you give up by having the jog in there? What are we adding here?
You see those
Does the
two
equipment we have
pieces?
now fit with what was originally proposed at town meeting? All of it fit fine?
Yes, but no, I'll call it very limited future growth opportunities.
If everything would fit, this would just give us more room for growth. That's all it does.
Correct. And the other thing to remember is that the chief also agreed to store most of his trailers outside, which are emergency management type trailers. Some of those should likely be inside, chief. So give him the opportunity now, if he was never to buy another new piece of apparatus to store them inside. The other thing I can assert to, and anyone that has fire experience, and fire trucks change in size all the time because they're dictated by NFPA, which is National Fire Protection Agency. So they're the ones that are dictating the size, not the chief. So it just gives us room to be able to kind of plug and play a little better, and it's coming at no cost, essentially.
And is there any doubt that those trailers would fit into the bigger square footage? No doubt about it. Okay.
Mr. Rooney?
What are the, what's the legend on the left-hand side, numbers? What are they looking at? I don't see it, I don't see anything.
That, you can disregard those. Those are, we're starting to detail the drawings as if it was a bid set of documents, and those are what are called column lines. So they refer to where the steel is.
Is there any other feedback on that? Anyone want to make a motion on that, to that effect?
I'll make a motion to continue with the drawings as they are, with the change.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
All right, continuing on, we did make a few changes to the plan from the last time. The departments had requested changes. Those are very minor, so I won't go in any detail. The roof plans are on there in case you wanted to see them. So we've come to the middle part of the package, which is the 3 representations of the front portion of the building focused on the administrative wing, not the garages. This is the piece of the building facing Route 85. And we focused on this primarily because the entry, for today's meeting, the entry was something we'd like to get a little bit more detail on and to get some feedback about preferences, considering this is a major piece of the building, and we weren't entirely sure that what was presented before was exactly what we wanted to go forward with. So we've got 3 options. We discussed them in the working group. The working group had a preference for option A, with at least one person or more than one person preferring option B, or at least wanting to explore option B in more detail. And universally, people preferred option A to option C. So we've kind of taken that assumption and said we'll continue to work on option A and option B. None of this is needing a vote at this point, but if you had comments, I'd appreciate getting them. I will just give you a brief overview of each of them. Option A takes the front piece of the building and actually pops the roof line up above the roof line of the wings surrounding it. So it breaks that a little bit, makes it more of a vertical element on the facade. The window was subject of some discussion on the second floor, that window there, and it seems like everybody wants us to go back to the same windows that are on the rest of the second floor, so they match. The original idea was that the glass on the second floor would kind of be a continuation of some of the glass work that's the front entry on the lower floor, so it's about the same width and the same general appearance. But we also want to continue to work on the canopy so that it's not looking like a stuck-on element that doesn't relate to the rest of the architecture. Option B, the primary advantage of this is that we feel like it's probably less costly than option A and option C. The other thing it does is it gives it a more monolithic or massive appearance, but it reduces the scale from a vertical element to more of a horizontal element. Essentially what's going on here are there are 6 piers, and they march out from the face of the building. The vestibule is essentially 50%, the back 50% of that volume, and the front 50% is open. So it's essentially a canopy or a bercochere or something like that. There would be logistical challenges of putting a window above this. We discussed snow and rain and ice, that sort of thing. So probably wouldn't be designed exactly like this. But in concept, it's a low, somewhat solid looking entry structure. And then Option C is similar to option A in the sense it's vertical again, but this time we're keeping the roof lines matched up. And the major difference is that the vestibule at the bottom is entirely enclosed in glass. One of the things that I felt were somewhat incongruous in this facade is that you've got somewhat of a heavy brick element on the second floor, supported by what looks to be a very light glass-like element on the first floor, which to most people's minds, when you see it in real life, it looks strange. You know, it looks like the glass shouldn't be able to support that weight. That's just anecdotally what I've picked up, but the good thing is I think that nobody really wanted us to pursue this option much, so we don't have to worry about that. So, any other comments that you'd like to add on these renderings before we move along? I'm happy to take any comments, suggestions that you have.
Lines.
In your opinion, what's gonna be the best for snow sliding and ice sliding off? Is it,
Well, in all three, we've provided a canopy that would protect the main entry, so that there wouldn't be anybody walking near a door that would have snow sliding on top of them. Certainly, any of the ones, all three of them peak the gable so that you're pushing the snow off to the side anyways, so that's important. I think option B we may, depending on the roofing materials, there may be a consideration of wanting to put snow guards or something so that snow doesn't crash down on top of the entry roof, but if we're using asphalt shingles and, you know, we have a certain pitch, it may not be that much of a concern. If we were using metal roofing, it'd be a different scenario.
maybe just worried in this scenario with the snow building up on the roof, is it gonna block the window?
That's what I was saying, yeah, this particular window in the middle probably won't technically be able to be like that. We'd either have a small window or move the window way over to the side so that, you know, snow could be here and not interfere with the window, so,
I think option A makes more sense.
yeah, definitely in that context.
Cook?
So, Jeff, every time you say one costs more than the other, I'm gonna say, how much? Do you have any idea what the difference in A and B are?
We actually had that exact same question. Do you want to answer a question?
Can you tell who else is on the advisory committee with me?
No, we talked about, you know, it's more in the tens of thousands, not the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which was the point that was made earlier in the working group. You know, it's tens of thousands difference between A and B. My suggestion, based upon the total cost of what I think that the two might be, in terms of the differences between the two in cost, is that cost is probably so small a number that you'll probably be more concerned of what the ultimate look is, that you leave the building with something, a front door essentially, that looks best, even though it may cost tens more. In terms of total project value, it seems like you're better off making a long-term decision that may cost a little bit more.
So
for
you
a
think
better
A
result.
looks better than B? Okay, so
I'm
I
saying
think
A
it
looks
does
better than
too.
B, yes.
I agree with that, but I don't think $50,000 is a little amount of money. I think it's a lot of money. So I would disagree with that statement, but I think A looks better than B too, but I think $50,000 is a lot of money.
Jeff, how,
Where did 50 come
to,
He said it's tens of thousands and not hundreds of
So it could be
thousands.
20s.
how do you
couldn't
put
know
some
that.
rough numbers, just, because you're gonna be looking, you can't.
I mean, I'd have to caution you at this point, if you want us to come to you with fully vetted numbers for every decision, we're not gonna be able to move as fast as we want to move. And I don't think that's what you're telling me, but I just wanna throw it out there. If that's the goal, we won't be able to do it. I can give you guidelines, but you can't necessarily get an actual number.
I just wanted everyone to be, I heard that before, but I just,
Yeah, I don't know if Vertex
know.
wants to go on the line for any numbers yet. Do you guys?
Well, it looked like about 100,
150 cents?
120 square feet that you were adding.
Yep.
So, what's that?
450?
$400 a square foot.
Yeah, but it's not really 400.
No, it's not, because
Slippery
Kathy was
slope,
spot
here's
on
the
for
slippery
us.
slope.
it's not 100 either.
I already did that math. That's how I got my 50,000.
That's the problem. You know, it's probably 20 to 30, because the point is you've already bought your HVAC system, you already bought your lights, you're buying an extra window,
Yeah,
you know, and you're buying some extra brick.
Yep.
You know, and the roof's gonna cost a little bit more to put over it.
Yep.
But it's not,
it's not nothing,
but
but
it's not
it's,
nothing.
Now,
but it's not a lot.
is there any chance that could increase the efficiencies of the design upstairs? Because that's
The-
gonna add some
Yeah,
space.
that particular area will help to increase the size of the fitness room. It's debatable whether you really want fitness room above your main entry sticking out prominently. So I wouldn't say that the space we gain is particularly advantageous, other than the fact that it simply is more, and if you're paying a lot less for that more, I guess it's good, but.
Especially if you're gonna, that room's gonna slide around a little bit.
Yeah, we did talk about some changes to the plan that may move the fitness room, and that may open up that area for potentially something else to be there, but we haven't decided formally what that might be. Yeah.
Mr. Rooney, do you have something?
So I always do design issues to my better half, and it's good to
Mike?
But I tend to like B better, only because I think it maintains the more rural look. I think A and C have more of a modern entrance. It also maintains the roof line, B. And one question I have, and again, with the caveat that my design ability is very limited. We had talked at some point, or we had thought at some point about possibly using some of the features of the existing police station on this new one. And one of those issues is maybe the cupola, and whether or not that could be designed such a way to go on this small entrance here. It certainly couldn't on A or C because of the flatness, but whether or not it could be incorporated on B.
Yeah.
Those are the only thoughts I had.
Interesting. Well, what we had talked about in the earlier meeting, the working group meeting, is that A and B would continue to be improved upon,
Yeah.
and new revisions would be brought back to the working group. So I don't think anything is out of the realm of possibility right now. Any other comments, questions?
So where were we at today? We had, so it was option A with the smaller windows, similar to option C up on the second floor.
Yep.
And then downstairs, on the first floor was, we're gonna keep that the same with the not fully enclosed in glass. That was kind of what
Yeah,
came, okay,
Right.
with a little bit, okay.
Just for opinion's sake, I like B better than A, but I think if you can develop both, they could give everybody a little more to chew on, I think.
Yep.
So, I think it's a little bit more understated and a little bit more, it just feels better with the other two wings of the building, so.
Anything else on the entrance?
What are we supposed to do,
No.
Nothing.
there's
He
no
doesn't want to
action.
vote tonight.
You-
I don't
Would
think
a
we're
vote
ready
help
either.
you, like,
No.
rather than waste time on
Nope.
two, to just
No, I got
focus on,
people
I mean,
voting
if we
for
all
both
like a certain
sides,
one?
so I'm just good, next time we'll come back and we're fine, we're okay still.
Okay. Because I like B too.
All right. About 50-50 at this point.
I think B will end up looking dated too, so I'm questioning that.
Okay. Well, the end result is we'll be back.
All right.
So we also did a rendering or a sketch of what you would see for the most part looking up through the golf course from Route 85. We only have one version of this so far, just for your, consideration at this point and any feedback you might have. This side of the building is gonna be one of the more prominent views. And if you remember way, way back when we actually had the building flipped, and the other side of the building, which in my opinion has, it looks a little nicer than the garages, from the public's perspective, was actually facing this side. But because we have many more rational reasons for the building to be in this orientation, the garage is here now. And so prior to this point, the garage had a blank wall, just solid brick. So now we're showing it with some vertical pieces, which may have windows at the top and then may have, other elements in it, solid elements like precast or something like that, which will help to have a linear repetition of elements, a design that helps to break up this long, fairly blank wall. So, we're looking at this point to try and improve the appearance of this side of the building. We don't have anything, obviously, at this point for you to vote on or anything, but if you had reactions to this rendering, I'd be happy to take your comments for that. You don't have to, but this is just, you hate it?
If you want my honest opinion.
I do. I'd rather get it now.
This is gonna be the main focal point of the building.
Yeah.
you lose option A, B, and C when you look at this. That's my,
Yeah, now, apart from the windows, apart from this vertical stuff and that vertical stuff, the mass of the building, it can't change.
right.
So we have to do something with the face of that building that makes it attractive.
You can't put like dormers up to be consistent with the other part of the building or not?
I think, because it's a flat roof and there's, we can talk about pitch roof, but and for all intents and purposes, it's gonna be a flat roof
Okay.
structure. It's gonna look odd if we start adding rooftop elements to it.
Okay.
So I think we kinda have to deal with what we've got. I think there should be something punctuating the long expanse of
Yes.
nothing. It's just a matter of how we do that. And then, of course, the tower, training tower at the end adds a vertical element to it. We've actually started to push that out a little bit so that it's not part of the same plane of brick, which helps to give a shadow line, eventually. And we may be able to put some windows into that too. Of course, coordinating with how they're using it for training purposes, but those windows would be just fixed glass windows.
If you move the tower to the front, does that do anything?
We can move the tower to the front. That is a training tower, which means that's where they'd have to do their training.
Right.
So I don't know if it would work with the fire department, chief, if that would interfere with operations at all? If it was out front? Okay.
Could you move it to the front and twist it so that the roof line would be consistent with the A, B, or C?
Yeah, absolutely. The roof can shift one way or the other. It doesn't matter which way it goes.
Again, I'm not the
See,
designer.
I thought you said you weren't good with design.
I am not the design guy, I just think that that can be improved upon.
Yeah. I agree with you.
But right now, we still have the long, expansive flat roof in between the police and fire building and the apparatus, and then whatever we do on this side. I mean, unless you start.
Oh, this
breaking
is
the
what you're
ground,
referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, so above the bays, that's a flat roof.
So unless we start messing around with that, we have that to deal with.
You pretty much have to deal with it, yeah. So right now, it's shown incredibly understated with no real cornice line at all, and that, I think, can be improved significantly, which will help dress up the top of the building.
Would you give us like an idea of a town that we could go by that has this type of flat 4-bay and see what type of design?
Well, I don't know if it would make sense at all, but, there's other stations out there. I know we did one in Belmont that, on Trapello Road, that was a flat roof building. They actually put their tower in between the bays. So,
Westbrook was built last year, it has that exact
4-bay.
4-bay.
With no
It's a
tower
flat
though,
roof.
right? No tower.
No, it's a
Yeah.
1-4. It looks quite nice, it's set back, like this is gonna be set back a little bit.
So you like this?
Well, I'm saying, that looks nice, I haven't,
No.
black and white.
Yeah.
I think it would look better, like
He's
it
gonna
says
work on
jazzed
it,
up.
he's
It's
gonna
all
work
right.
on it, he's gonna put some things on it.
Yeah.
Sorry?
He's gonna work on it, he'll make it a little bit better.
If you start doing pitched roofs inside your apparatus bay, it's a lot of dead space. Paying for a lot of air, a lot of space to heat.
Go by Westbrook.
Keep it flat.
It looks better outside, but, or more interesting, I don't think better, it looks more interesting, but you're not getting a lot of payback for that.
Can you pick up some visual interest with the masonry elements?
yeah, I think that would be a little bit more subtle, depending on what you build it out of. And if it's contrasting with red brick, then you'll see it from a distance, and that could be quite nice. I have had every expectation that, at the bottom of this building here, we'd have a base. So whether it's stone or some rusticated material, craggly-looking material, with a sill that lined up all the way around the building, it starts to differentiate the facade into parts. And so I think, the base is gonna be fine. It's what we do at the top of the building, which will help, cap it. And then primarily, how do we subdivide the long expanse of facade with windows or some other elements, whether that's masonry elements and solid completely, but just some sort of design, or actual windows. And our office looked at it, felt like putting actual windows that function into whatever we're doing was better than just simply drawing designs on the facade with different colors of masonry. So that's where we've started to go, and I don't have any illusion that this is as Mr. Rooney said, the final design. It certainly needs a lot of work. I just was looking for whatever feedback you had, and I think this is good, all good feedback.
But we also have space over in front of the tower. We have the loft, right?
Yes, there's a loft here, which is another reason why the windows make sense there.
So just, and I don't know that was ever kind of in the program, right? This loft or
It was,
are you stealing space from somewhere
it
else?
was not
maybe?
an actual defined space, it was part of the description of space needs essentially from the department.
What's it for?
It's essentially a training and storage space. So what they can do is actually confined space training. They will actually have a hole in the loft. They can set up a tripod and lower firefighters down, first responders down, and practice doing, confined space like manhole rescues between the loft and the training room below.
All right, so you have your marching orders on that item?
So the only other thing briefly to go over as far as the design is that we proposed a complete reorganization of this portion of the plan to the fire department. Primarily, we did it to resolve an issue with the dormitory on the second floor that was nagging us from the beginning of the design. And that is that the windowsills in the dormitory rooms, which I'll just come up to, this is the second floor, dorm rooms are right here. Because of the apparatus bay that is right here, the roof of that bay being 20 feet off the ground and the floor of the second floor being 14 feet off the ground means that our windowsills are about 7 to 8 feet off the floor of the second floor because they have to be above the roof and you have to account for snow and other things like that. So our concern as architects was that, gee, that's not really as nice a space. So what we did was a series of maneuvers that would allow them to, at first, get about 6 feet clear between the window and the wall of the apparatus, and that kind of looks like that. And then, in another version, dropped the headroom of the bay here, so that's a 10-foot door with a lower headroom, and then get more space in front of the window. So these windows could actually be down at regular windowsill height. The response we got was that neither option was acceptable to the department, and they'd rather just have, in fact, don't mind having the high windows in the dorm rooms, as long as they know whether it's night or day, raining or sunny skies, they don't care if they can't see out of the windows. So that feedback is important, so we will sort of jettison the changes to the garage. However, the changes on the first floor here, we were told actually were preferred by the fire department. So the change there will mean a reconfiguration of the building a little bit, but the good thing is that there's no net increase in space, so we're not adding any cost to do this.
What are the changes?
It's a whole series of things. So in large, it was just the removal of the portion of the building that extended out here. If you remember back, that sort of stuck out there. We pushed the stair back, and then we added a 6-foot zone to the building, essentially expanded the side of the building out by 6 feet. And so pushed all the program that was up here down and reconfigured this program so that it took advantage of that 6-foot space. On the second floor, we dropped the office that was on the second floor to this location on the first floor. And so the fire department actually said this layout works better for them than the previous layout, and they prefer that we continue to go with this approach. So didn't add any space, didn't change really the design much, and it seems to be an improvement over what was there before, so we're essentially heading off in this direction. So that's essentially the sum total of what our discussion on the architectural designs were. We did have some other conversations with them about some other things, and we'll bring that back to a working group meeting next week. But that's the direction we're heading in.
I had one question. Just looking at A21.
Yep.
And I'm looking at the ones at the top of the packet. I assume the police side is the same.
Yes.
The report writing room, or the report writing hallway.
For the fire or the police?
For the police.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I saw it in an earlier plan and I don't see it here.
Yeah, so it's right here. Report writing, reports right there. It's in the corridor next to roll call. It's just an alcove.
one of my questions is whether that should be a room.
We talked about it in the earlier phase of the
Yep.
project, and this was what they were okay with. It's actually what we did in Weston, and they saw it in Weston and liked it, so that's why we're doing it.
Well,
Unless you guys want to throw out any reason to change it right now, at this point. Okay.
All right. My concerns are confidentiality, people going through the hallway. There are some things that you don't necessarily want people looking over someone's shoulder when they're writing it, but.
I don't think there'd be anybody lingering.
Okay.
So that was any other comments on the design at this point? Yeah, so I should point that out, that, there was some weird things going on in the middle of the plan, so it was not allowing the electric room and the boiler room to be connected at all, so now we've connected it together. We'll define where the two rooms separate. You notice there's no wall separating them, but there will be a wall. We'll define that in the future, but it allowed us to actually get even more space for evidence storage, so that was helpful, and we didn't, increase the size of the building, so it was.
And originally you were going to the dead file rooms to get into that, now you just have.
Yeah, I mean, there actually probably will end up being a door to the fireside here. They can still go through the dead records if they want, but there'll be a door here, and they can go directly to boiler room and into the electric room there.
Jeff, that's what I was gonna suggest, moving that 136 over to corridor C-103.
Yeah, I have to zoom way in, but which one are you referring, the boiler room?
Where you get the dead records to going into boiler room, can you move that over to the fire corridor?
Yeah, here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think there'll be a door here, no
Yeah.
question about it. There'll
Yeah,
definitely be a door there. The question is whether we'll keep the door here.
Yeah.
And the fire department originally said that actually was preferable, they'd, be able to get right into the electric room that way. But that was before we had access to it from this side.
But once you wall that off, you're gonna need two ways out, the electrical room?
No, we shouldn't.
Put it all in one?
We
I mean,
can-
electrical,
Yeah.
you can't go electrical, right?
The electric room's probably gonna be right here, and and there only needs to be one means from that room.
Okay, I have a quick question, between the two options of the window and the edge of the building up above, that didn't shrink the apparatus widths at all?
No, because we just pushed the side of the building over by 6 feet. So the building lost a tail and gained a little girth, essentially.
You have to go scientific on it.
Except for the tail part, that sounds familiar.
The other things we discussed, we had a long series of meetings today. The other things we discussed were the HVAC systems and communications and security systems. And I'm not gonna go into any detail of many of these things, but to say that the HVAC options were presented. There were a economic analysis was done, and I have copies if people would like to look at it. It's also something digital, I think, was sent to the group as well. In that package is this chart here. It has, in gray, a base system, and this is an engineering analysis computer model that they did, predicting model energy usage, so not actual, but model energy usage. And then 3 options that would improve upon the energy efficiency and get you some sort of payback over time. So they included your initial capital investment as well as your utility costs and annual maintenance and operation costs. And because of these options are actually more energy efficient than the base system, there's an expected payback in number of years. And all 3 of the options paid back in less than 2 years, or two years. And all of 3, including the base system, were within $20,000 first cost of each other. So the reality is you can pretty much pick which system the town wants to operate long-term, wants to buy and operate, so that they're most comfortable with it. Because we had a lot of discussion about maintenance contractors and, familiarity with the systems, and that's all very important. As well as we want to make sure whichever system is good enough to operate, controls-wise for the users, and have good user comfort, because that's the ultimate goal, is people are happy with the system that's there. It's performing well for them. So the decision at the working group level was made to allow the town another week to digest this information, maybe go talk to people and look at installations that have this. We're gonna give you a list of buildings, police and fire buildings that have these type of systems that you can go look at, and then by next Monday, which we have a tentative building committee meeting, I think we're probably gonna talk about finalizing, a decision is given back to us on which system you're gonna choose, so that we can have the engineers start their work. So that was the major, feedback we had in the engineering meetings. There was a lot of other details talked about, but we don't need to get into that.
Will we be having another meeting to vote on that as a whole committee?
Yes, so
Making sure.
if Jeff is done, you think you've
I
got?
am done. I mean, we can talk about the, engineering,
I
site
mean,
stuff.
I'm sorry,
but
I just
think
meant on
that's-
the HVAC decision.
Well, I think any major decision is gonna require a full committee vote.
Because he was saying we're
So-
gonna be having another working group meeting next Monday and hopefully have a vote to put the engineer in that way,
So, remember, our schedule calls for an optional full committee meeting depending upon
that might be next
how
Monday.
tonight went.
Okay.
So, I guess, there's been a lot to digest. I think there's further conversations that need to occur about the golf committee aspect of this, I think more than anything else, and Jeff needs just another week to work and get feedback. Just one point I wanted to clarify on the HVAC before we talk about a meeting next week is, I think you got a lot of input from the facilities director.
We did.
And that's who's helping to kind of, right, he's gonna essentially inherit the system, and have to maintain it. So I think what he's trying to do is think about that on a broader perspective in terms of what the other town buildings are having, right? And can we get contracts that cover all the buildings as opposed to having one system in the police and fire, one in the library, one in town hall, et cetera. So I think that's really what the holdup is at this point. As Jeff mentioned, right, it is somewhat of a cost item, but it's more of a, how we think about this from a long-term impact on the town's budget, not necessarily the impact on this project budget. So with that being said, if we were to have a meeting next week, Jeff, of the full committee, what items do you think would be ready for vote, just so we can then gauge as a committee whether we think that's worth doing or whether we wait until October, I believe it's 12th, which is 12th, which is the next
I think
scheduled
the
meeting.
primary thing, a piece of business would be choosing the HVAC system at the next meeting. I think we would have another design update to talk about progress of it's only been a week, but we would have some more information. And, depending on what I can get out of my engineer for the septic systems, there might be an update on that piece as well, various costs of combining the septic. But I think it's primarily, and maybe even solely, the only vote would be on HVAC.
And you, I assume, do not want to wait until the 12th for that.
I mean, you could make us wait, and we would definitely wait, but that would have an impact on the schedule for the engineers being able to start. At this point, the HVAC engineers can't actually do any design until they know which system they're gonna be designing, which seems obvious, but if we waited till the 12th, there's really nothing they could do. Their arms are tied, their hands are tied until that point. So I'd like to get them started if we can.
Okay. And you're already gonna be having a working group meeting, right?
What's
You're already
that?
gonna have a working group meeting next Monday?
Yes, we are gonna have a working group meeting, as a matter of course anyways.
Okay. So is there any objections to holding a meeting next week?
No objection.
I believe this room is taken for planning or conservation, one or the other, probably planning. So fire department available? All right, so chief will get back to me on a final location. Other than Jeff's agenda, I do think we as a group need to have further conversation about how we're gonna interact with the golf course committee and whether we want to invite them back for, where I don't have to necessarily cut them off because we have others waiting. But I think that, if I had to summarize tonight, remains our single largest obstacle. I know planning and conservation were non-committal in terms of when they'll sign off, which I get. but I think if we don't have a plan on the golf course, one way or another, I think that's where we could start to spiral out of control very quickly and lose focus on our core objectives. 'Cause I think some of the requests, quite honestly, to Jeff tonight from the other committees in terms of the outside that red box, we haven't engaged him for. So I think it's just unfair to ask certain things. So I realize that some people have been here over 5 hours at this point, for those that were on the working group meeting. So, are there any suggestions on what to do with the golf course committee next? And how we start to move that towards a speedy resolution?
Yeah, the only comment I have on that is you start to talk about other costs and how you're gonna involve them in and making them part of a bid and then getting them approved. Remember that when we talk about alternates in a job, they have to be in a very specific order. So if, you were talking about an alternate for anything else, but if the first alternate is the golf course and all these other extras, you don't have a ton of flexibility to get pricing through a bid and then decide. Because somebody, as they price that golf course work, whether you take it or not, may change who the low bidder is on the public safety building. So it's,
And a good point, John, because it slipped my mind until you just said it, but I believe the ruling is that you cannot import into a project as a change order a bid alternate. Because if you bid it and you don't take the alternate, you're then basically assigning a bid order to those bidders that you would have taken.
you have to change it.
And then later on, you do the same thing as an alternate, you're essentially playing fast and loose with the bid results. You picked your contractor, and then you're saying, okay, now I want the thing I couldn't have gotten at the time of bid. So you do have to substantially change it so that it's a different thing.
Bigger picture, you have a whole funding question here because.
I don't think we need to worry about this. I mean, there
Well-
actually is more of a plan than you might have gotten from tonight as far as the meeting that we had a week and a
But-
half ago.
But if there is a plan, somebody needs to tell who's gonna design the new septic, who's gonna procure the moving of the building, who's gonna procure the design of the foundation that the new building, that the old building's gonna be moved to. And you all have seen that plan. Those contour lines are very tight, which means there's a lot of slope there. This isn't just cheap work. This is earthwork, and you're gonna be spending more. It's not just 20 grand to move a tee and a green. There's road work that needs to be done, conservation, everyone's gonna chime in on the parking lot for the golf course. Is it temporary? Is it another impervious surface? If so, where's the stormwater relief for that gonna go? So, there's a good idea, but as we talk about our red line, we can go march ahead with our red line and do it. But the manner of the golf course and what's gonna happen, decisions and planning, there should be if there's going to be a landscape architect for the golf course, they should be hired right now, because they're already behind in order for our timeline.
I think they agreed to do that at the last meeting. I think there's an RFP that's about to go out, or maybe it's already gone out. It's gone out? It's about to?
So just as your concerns about them being married together, at a certain point, there will have to be a divorce. We're gonna either have to, fish or cut bait to keep the public safety project on the path to keep going. Otherwise, either that or his scope of work needs to be expanded immediately, and we get creative on how we figure out the dollars that are golf dollars.
I could definitely see the driveway up to the golf course parking lot and the parking lot itself being part of the civil engineering scope of our project because of the simple matter of the traffic impact. If we're gonna have to do traffic analysis and golf is part of that analysis, how could we possibly leave it up to some future thing or say it might be, it may not be, or there's another professional doing that engineering work and now we've gotta take that guy's work, marry it to our work, and then put it together into a traffic plan. It just seems like we're making things more complicated than they need to be. And that's one of the reasons why I wanna get you an answer on that, and it may ultimately, initially, we decided, in conversation with the engineer, that actually made more sense to just do a little thing, because at the time, we didn't even know what they were considering for septic. We didn't even realize moving a building.
But but once you get the answer to that question, where's the building gonna go? Is the below the grade of the septic, or is it above? Simple, so you can get an answer to your question next week, sure, we can incorporate it in. But until you answer the question of where the building is going to go and how it's gonna sit on the property, we can't finish that equation to put them together to submit all as one package to those committees.
I think Mr. Lyon said something.
One of the other things we haven't talked about is where are we gonna park 15 to 20 cars for workers? Because as the project starts going, we're gonna see more people on site. So, I mean, that's gonna take up some spaces, or do we go to Woodward and see if they can park in the big lot?
Golfers.
Yeah, and golfers.
Yeah, I mean, the whole issue of construction is, logistics is a completely different
Hasn't even been
scenario, and we
discussed
haven't
yet,
even talked about it, other than the fact that we're trying to figure out how the septic field gets built.
I think, you know, as we approach construction, cars, traffic, we need to have some outside of the box discussions, you know, where else in the town. Listen, if the closest they can park is a mile away, as long as it's in the plan, as long as it's in the plan and the specs they're bidding on it, it's fine. It's when they show up and you haven't told them that they can't park there, that's the issue. So if there's limited real estate, you save it for the golf, and then you tell the workers to go somewhere else. It's a big site. Once it's cleared and ready, they'll park all over the site. Don't even worry about that. This site will absorb 100 cars once it's to grade. But before that, you know,
Clearing it, getting it
clearing and
prepped.
grubbing and everything else is gonna have to be, you know, they'll probably have to park somewhere else.
How many cars do you think roughly?
Workers?
Yeah, 20?
Oh, more than that.
It could be
At the-
50, 60.
In the early stage?
No,
No,
no.
no, no.
I meant early
Oh,
stage.
Couple dozen.
Yeah, maybe.
You know,
Does anybody know how many spaces there are during the day at the community center?
I was just thinking that.
There's a few.
There might,
I'm
it
guessing
might
like-
even be like a dozen, you
Yeah.
know, at the really early stages, where there's just a couple excavators and a dump truck and.
Yeah, but you're also gonna have to get this visitor parking situated if you're gonna have golf course
right
parking.
away.
Right
Yeah.
away, that's gonna be like step one, right?
Golfers over there too.
Well, one thing the golf course committee mentioned, and Mr. Cruciani can verify this, is that
Mike?
the golfers that park there need to be close to where they're going, because there's a lot of
really?
less than agile golfers that if they have to walk far, they're not gonna come and golf.
Yeah.
So they
There-
gotta park and get right to the course.
If it's part of the plan, and again, John's totally right, this has to be done like now.
Right.
If it's part of the plan to do this roadway and parking lot, maybe that's one of the along with the septic field, because that's where the force main's coming through, that, you know, that gets done, so that, and a connection is made somehow, I don't know how. I mean, I don't even want to say it, but the Woodward School, maybe it dives into that circle, and the golfers come up that way during construction, and they use that upper parking lot, and it's all done when we're actually doing the building. But again, that has to be done like now.
So another critical path is what you said before. I think you need to get hold of the school committee and see if they can accelerate their decisions to what they want to do, one way or another.
Yeah, I agree. So let me ask a procedural question on, at what point can you clear this land? Like, do you need planning and conservation on board before you start clearing? I know you can't start building anything, but if you were to start to get the site ready, and let's just say you had a Board of Health permit to put a septic in, is that enough? Or like, what is the process?
Well, you heard tonight, they want complete site plan, no questions,
But
everything engineered.
do you need to go before planning to clear a site?
Well, there's not much to clear. Frankly, it's pretty empty site. So, I mean, we're not talking about taking trees down. We're talking about earthwork and starting, you know, grading and getting the site prepped. I don't know how much their threshold is, but
We'll probably work with us.
would have to talk to the staff and figure out where they would typically draw the line. I mean,
Gotta get the
you're a little
flag.
bit out of my depth here
Yeah.
to determine exactly where that line is, but, because it's rare that we do a project where the owner takes on a certain amount of work before the contractor gets on site, but,
Flagging and whatnot would have to be.
well, the
vetted
flagging's
first. No, but that,
done, but that whole conservation
approval of
piece
it, you
would
know.
have to be done, because, you know, they wouldn't want you working anywhere close to that, and it's all on the property.
If we were doing earthwork, we'd have to let a separate contract for that, is that right?
Yes.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
Which is not a bad idea.
which is, that's probably your single best way to save time here, is to
So,
do a site package.
Yeah,
So-
but- and the site package is tied into the regulatory piece, and we've now heard them say that, you know, maybe there's more than 2 hearings, so now are we into December or January for regulatory, and that's putting us closer to the bid date, so how do we do a separate site package if they're just following each other by a month or 6 weeks?
So, can you reach out to the town planner tomorrow and conservation agent and just
Yeah,
float the question and see what the appetite is? Because maybe they just add it to their agenda and they need their boards or commissions to weigh in.
Yeah, help us, how do you see us saving time?
Yeah,
Ask them for help.
say to them, or you tell us how to do this so we can get the site work going.
and I'm happy to reach out to the respective chairs, but I think they're gonna lean on the town employees just to give an initial read, and then they'll decide whether their committees need to meet and discuss it, or whether there's already a rule in the books.
Do we think if we do an early site package and are able to marry our work with the golf course landscape work, that's how and why we would do an early package?
It's the only- it's the
Even if
only-
it's
the only reason.
a month, it allows us to get married and divorced in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think, you know, I talked to the engineer about doing the septic in particular because, you know, it's a little bit more straightforward. You know, the goal is, you know, exactly how to satisfy that goal, and it's just a matter of getting the field in and out of the way so that it's done over the winter time or the early spring, and it doesn't impact golf. If we start wrapping in drainage basins, parking lots, roads, then we start thinking about that line and where does the planning board and the
Well, no,
conservation
I
consider
think
the
for an early
line?
site package, you would focus on, I wouldn't worry so much about the footprint of the building inside the red line. I think you're worried about public access and the road to the parking
Yeah,
and the septic. So it's all golf impact, basically, that would be your early site package. How that gets paid for, out of the job, not out of the job, that's a different question. But I
That's
think,
something we have folks, i.e. the Board of Selectmen, that we can have that conversation
yeah,
with.
because to me, I think that's your best, because otherwise, that's the only reason you're going early is to make sure golf happens. That's it, because otherwise, if golf wasn't an issue, no, you would let this take its course, and whether we broke ground on May 1st or June 1st, it's still a great amount of time to get the building, foundations in, structure up, start to get it in close for the winter. This is all about golf.
So I'm not sure why we're meeting next week insofar as there's.
HVAC.
Oh, okay, we're not gonna be talking about the parking issue or the
I may
septic
have,
issue.
I may have an answer on septic for you. So that could be part of the discussion.
And we'll have some feedback if he reaches out to
Yeah.
planning
If I
and
get-
asks
if I get
the
some
question, we'll
feedback.
have some
Yeah,
feedback.
or the only reason because the golf course committee is not meeting until a week from Wednesday, so there's not gonna be much feedback, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, we'll
sorry?
have some more information about the septic field constraints, engineering constraints.
What's driving your meeting schedule? Just out of curiosity, is it availability of the golf course committee? It
No,
just
I think-
seems like it's.
I think from the last meeting, what drove the schedule was the anticipated RFP going out and wanting to get that back in for the next meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
2 RFPs.
2 RFPs, yeah. Figuring we needed to get those back before we could move forward.
Do you think it would be worthwhile if they were open to it for them to come and have an extended discussion, or do we feel like we have the questions that we need to get answers to first and then we can report back? So if we met next Monday, we'll probably have some guidance on whether planning says you can't touch the site until you have comprehensive site review done, so that we have a plan B, or we say this is the avenue we're starting to explore in terms of an early site package.
I don't think that you should involve them on this next meeting. I don't think, they need to meet again, and really sit down and figure out how to make this all work, and they can't do it off the cuff, sitting here with us. So I think you gotta let them meet again, and try to put it all together as far as how they're gonna do it together. They made a lot of progress at the last meeting. They're all golfers, so they know what they're talking about. So I think you gotta let them have one more
Okay.
meeting.
So, we obviously have some homework to do on our part of how we can interact better with golf, but I'd say for that October 12th meeting, I think it's imperative, if I look at this schedule, that they are coming to us, right, whether it's you, Mr. Rooney, or whether it's the full committee, with like what they really need, because we'll have given some feedback next Monday that you could take to that meeting on, you said the 27th? I mean, I just,
They
weeks are slipping
They
by.
won't have an architect yet.
No.
They still won't have it, and if they do, they've just chosen, they won't have contracted
But,
and met.
but let's just say, let's play out a positive scenario. Let's just say,
It's not what they get paid for.
yeah, I know. If we can start doing site work and we find a way to accommodate that parking lot, right? And that's what we go to planning and conservation with. And then they're just on their own to figure out septic and the building issue,
Yeah.
right? Because it seems like, I might be mischaracterizing, but it doesn't seem like the movement of the tees and the holes are concerning anyone. It seems like it's gonna be the clubhouse.
Right, so that club, but in listening to what planning was saying, I agree with you 100%. If we could go to planning with just a golf-related site work package, the road up, the road down, whatever we're gonna do there, from what I heard tonight, where that building's gonna sit is an integral detail on that plan. So, until that gets finalized, and we can show planning, new foundation right here, here's how the grades are gonna work, drainage, all of that.
But is a landscape like, are you procuring the right service? Like, is a landscape architect actually gonna be able to tell you where to put that building?
Maybe it would tell you where to put it, but they're not going to.
He's a
If
golf course
he's a golf
architect, so he
designer,
should-
that's a
And
different.
if they're
Buildings
literally
too.
just picking the existing building up and putting it over there, you don't really even need a design for the building. You
Well,
just,
you do, because it's.
you need foundations.
All the
you
carts are
need-
underneath.
You need foundations, well, that's what's there now.
No,
You need foundations, you need
you're gonna need all that in
the
the
landscape
design though,
package
to figure out how it works with those tight contour lines.
Yeah. Well, landscape architects should be able to help with that. I mean, yes, a civil engineer would be integral to that piece. From my perspective, I see the difficulty from the design team's perspective is how do we integrate with the golf course group and their work product, plug it into ours, and then go to planning board by the 23rd of October.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
No.
Because that's when our application is due.
That would be excellent, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But just so everybody understands, that has an impact, every week that doesn't happen, that has an impact on break ground on May 1st.
That
If we wait a
is
month,
why I am
it's June
concerned at the
1st,
pace.
I mean, I take that to a certain degree. I mean, Jeff can keep designing, doesn't impact the building. We can continue to design the building and the rooms and the structure and all of that, but that whole site plan kind of is a big question mark until the golf piece gets finalized so that we can lock them together.
I'd say at this point in our schedule, in terms of how the regulatory piece fits in, if we only have 2 hearings, and there was some skepticism, I guess, about 2 hearings, but if we stick with 2 hearings, we have exactly pretty much 2 months between when the regulatory would finish and when we would go out to bid. If we delayed application for a month, that just adds a month to the schedule, so we'd now be down to 1 month between when the regulatory process was closed and we would go out to bid. By all means, we want to be able to have a regulatory closure before we go out to bid. We don't want that being a outstanding issue while we're in the bidding process of the project. So we pretty much have a 2-month float time that activity can exist within, and that assumes a 2-hearing process. If it's 3 or 4, that chips away at that float time.
Planning board's procedure is to require a full, complete site plan before we start any work. What does that do to the timeline?
Before we start any site work, the septic stuff, that that would be probably impossible that we would be able to get the septic work in this spring.
Right.
We'd have to wait and do that maybe later in the winter of 2018.
Right.
When this will still be under construction, but then the connection to Woodward would happen in the summer of 2019, which would be after this project is, online theoretically, so you would still have a disconnect in your construction
Because my
sequencing.
experience, and it's limited with the planning board, is that before you start anything, before you start any work, they want full, complete site plan documents.
I suggested if we learn more about the septic, that'll help us figure out how to move next, because just with this conversation, I'm remembering when we did Woodward, I think we did the septic as a separate package, because we bought the building, and the contractor for the building handled their own site development package, which is the best way to do that, because if we try to buy that site development package for GC, we're gonna have trouble doing that. But the septic system is different, and that's what we did here when we built it on St. Mark's. If we buy that separately, we could do some shaping of that upper parking lot to get the golfers near where the building is gonna go, maybe. So maybe that would make sense to do that, but we'll learn more when we get the perk test information, we learn what the septic system has to be. So I think that'll help us figure out how to move next. I don't see buying an early package other than just a septic package.
And a little bit of parking lot.
Well, yeah, and in that package, have that shaping for the golf parking lot, and maybe there's more, but maybe not. And he's gonna be up there anyway with some big equipment.
Yeah, don't forget,
Maybe
of
that's
course,
the way to
with
get
that,
all this
we
all
have
in one
drainage
package. That makes good sense. If
issues.
we buy that site development package separate from a GC,
So
We're
I
gonna
think
be
the
smart.
There's
conversation,
gonna be a lot of this that's gonna go
the
on.
conversation that I'm going to have with, or the engineer will have shortly with the staff about how far can we go down the road is going to be crucial to determining whether it's conceivable for us to even consider a parking lot with the site, with the septic field, or whether the septic field at all could fit as an early release. I still think the septic field is fine doing that early, with planning board. I don't see any issue with that, but I do think that because of the drainage issues associated with doing parking in roads, even if they're gravel, we're gonna be into planning board, with that. I think they're gonna wanna see more, a package from planning board. And maybe we can convince them that it's okay if we went in two pieces, and, this is just step one of the overall master plan, and this is the part that's furthest away from sort of the critical parts of the site, so, because we don't have all of our engineering done on part B, maybe part A is okay, with the caveat that we're still coming with part B, and that's gonna complete it.
So when you say come forward with one package, one site plan package for the septic, is that what you're talking about?
So if we are required to go, because of the drainage issues for the roadway and the parking lot for the golf course, if we're required to go to planning board for that, that would be package A, and then package B would be
Which would
the
be
remainder
complete
of-
site plans for those?
Yes,
items.
a complete site package for that. If we divorced it and we just did a septic field and no parking or access, which I don't think is really feasible, but if that's all we wanted to do, I think we could do that part of the process without having to go to planning board and Concom.
they'd have to sign off on it. But anyway, the septic design will educate all of this.
Right. So I guess the big takeaway is that we don't have an answer to these questions yet. We have to ask a few more questions to get some answers, and hopefully by next Monday, we'll know significantly more than we do today about the process we're gonna have to undertake.
Okay, so I do think it makes sense just to get the HVAC decision for anyone that can come next week. We'll make the HVAC decision, and Jeff will give any relevant updates that he has. In the meantime, we'll be in contact with planning. My guess is if they want to discuss something, they will invite us or some representative from our committee to participate in their meeting that evening to have that discussion. So I would suggest we meet on what time is your working group meeting? Do you have that set yet?
We didn't set a time, but 4 o'clock? we can meet whenever, but could be 4 o'clock.
So do we want to say 6 or 6:30 for the full committee meeting? That way it gives us time if planning adds us later on.
I'm unavailable next Monday, but Kathy is gonna be, I just checked with her, she can come on behalf of the golf course committee, the liaison, so.
Okay. So 6 or 6:30, any preference?
6:30.
6:30?
All right, 6:30 it is, next Monday. 2 more quick things. We need to approve the meeting minutes from August 24th. Mr. Lyons distributed those. Are there any proposed changes?
Are those in this packet?
No, they were distributed via email.
The meetings at the fire department then?
And it's your town email.
Fire department, unless you hear otherwise.
Town email.
Thank you, guys, thank you.
So I got a
Thank you.
few.
Okay,
Mr. Lyons demoted me, so I want to be re-promoted.
okay.
You gotta read them all, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And do you really have to say I was late?
Still on my stupid question.
So, sorry, Kathy's going through her changes, then go to Pete.
Jason, was there anything else you needed us for? Should we?
We'll be done in 3 minutes,
Oh,
hopefully,
okay,
but
sorry, that's fine.
So the only substantive thing, there's a couple typos, but that was easy, I'll show you those later. Go to your bullet where it says pre-qualification on page 2 of bids will take place in January. Context will once again review the cost estimate and after approval from the committee, put the project out to bid at the end of February. I don't think we've confirmed this, but I think that we're leaning toward having 2 cost estimates done and not the third one.
There was talk of having a third one by you.
We did talk about it before, but then I thought when they were here last week that once they explained their procedure, which is just like what John and Steve are going to do, same type of entity, 4 years experience, that we didn't necessarily think we needed to do 3. We've got the 12,016 built into contacts, that spreadsheet. So, but we probably have not formally agreed, but I think it's still up in the air as to how many of these we do. But we'll save $16,000 every time we cut one out.
are there any other proposed changes?
I have one. The next bullet point, the project will take 14 to 16 months to build, not weeks. Just the next bullet point from where we were.
That was what was said during the meeting. Watch it.
Weeks? Weeks?
Oh, months, I'm sorry. Should be
Yeah.
months.
Any other comments? Motion to accept those as amended?
I make a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
Is there a second?
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Last item is, I am on the Board of Selectmen agenda for tomorrow night to provide another project update. I plan to summarize in less than 5 minutes this meeting. We'll see if I can do it. I plan to highlight just our ongoing concern about the collaboration between the 2 properties, and obviously any advice or wisdom that they can provide to help either committee will be what I'm seeking. So I'll just go and provide the update. I think I'm sandwiched between a couple of public hearings, so it'll be a quick in and out. But if anyone has anything else you want me to convey, I'm all ears, but I just, in the interest of full transparency, wanted to throw that out there. Okay, last item, and I hesitate to bring it up, but I need someone to own uploading documents to the town website as like these meeting packages. I did that under the last regime, but it's a lot of work when you're also taking the chairman's seat. So I don't need a volunteer tonight. I'm happy to walk you through how to do it. It is incredibly intuitive. I do it for 2 different towns, 2 different roles, but it's a very intuitive website. So think about volunteers. I will be selecting someone next week if I don't get volunteers. And I will be happy to help along the way. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.